Have you ever noticed that the pacing, tone, and story development of Pokemon changes after Ash is hit by lightning in early episodes? How Ash and his world are relatively normal until after that incident? I have a theory. The accident with the bike put Ash in a coma. Days later, he was found and hurried to the hospital and treated with heavy medications. This is why Team Rocket became less menacing. The medications took effect and stabilized his coma dreams so that, instead of being terrifying, they become idyllic. They allowed him to live out his Pokemon Master fantasies. After the beginning episodes, the series is the result of Ash's subconscious mind fulfilling his desires as well as attempting to escape reality. Should Ash realize he's in a coma, he would wake up and suffer brain damage. So he must take down all his mental barriers one by one. If he can do that, he can come to grips with who he is and escape his coma. Further evidence comes from the realization that even though his journeys take him past very vast distances, he never usually travels by bike due to having developed a phobia of them. The coma in fantasy explains why he never changes much physically. It explains the worldwide socialism as thought up a safe system of government that would run smoothly and keep the world going, allowing his adventures to work like they do. It also explains how a child can go off on his own into a world of dangerous and untamed animals. In addition, it explains why every town has the same police officer and every Pokemon Center has the same nurse. Joy and Jenny he knew from his hometown. They act as a safety net or anchor, allowing him to feel safe no matter where he goes. They represent stability. The professors represent Ash's ideals, which is why Gary became a professor. The fantasy also explains why every time he enters a new region that virtually no one has heard of him, despite his conquests. How else could Paul, the rival of the Sinnoh region, not know of someone who placed at least the top 16 of all three leagues and destroyed the Orange League in Battle Frontier? Moving on, the characters closer to him. Ash's traveling partners are aspects of himself he can enjoy but cannot associate with himself. Brock is Ash's represents repressed sexuality. Ash fell into a coma of virgin and, as such, needed an outlet for his growing sexual frustrations. However, since he can never experience sex, Brock must never succeed. Brock's stay with Professor Ivy was an attempt by Ash's mind to suppress his sexuality. Brock isn't just a projection of Ash's sexuality, but also a projection of Ash's fatherly instincts. He leaves his siblings to journey with Ash because he cannot cope with having such responsibility. You may notice that James got much more dialogue in this part of the series, as well as getting more touchy-feely with his Pokemons and exposing much more of his backstory. Ash didn't enjoy this much, which is why Brock returns, horrified, and refuses to speak about it. Ash's subconscious was repressing him at the time, so, other than a general feeling of dread, he has no idea what happened. Further evidence of Brock being Ash's sexuality is that he keeps returning the series after Ash meets a new female aspect of himself. Misty is the first such aspect we encounter. Because she is the first, and is merely an aspect of Ash, our explanations as why Misty plays such a prominent role in the show, but is ultimately unattainable, since he never really knew her before the coma. Since Misty is his initial love interest, if only subconsciously, he needed her to reach a certain level of womanhood. He felt that women could only have relationships after they've matured. In practice, however, he finds he can't cope with it, and he lacks real-world experience. He wants the normal, pushy, arrogant Missy he knew, thus not letting her keep Togepi. He can see this arc and constant berating of his sexuality, but her eventual mellowing until she had faded into the background. Since Ash was quite attached to her, this was traumatizing. After this experience, anyone with around him threatening to mature quickly ends up leaving only for another, more naive villain to enter his life. Gary Oak is what Ash wants to be. He is wish fulfillment. His success, and then settle down to a normal life. Ash needs someone to succeed in his world, or he won't be able to validate it and start questioning why he was there where he is. It's a subconscious trap to keep him from becoming too aware of his situation. His mind must have figured out that awareness of the coma would snap him out of it, so it took something the boy already loved and built a way for him with it. However, Ash is too complacent to make a final stand and fight his way out of it, and cannot escape. This is why he keeps encountering legendary Pokemon. There's a mind way of showing him he can do great things if he tries. It's a way to encourage him to push forwards. Team Rocket are the qualities of himself that Ash deems negative, but is coming to terms with. Jesse and James want to appease Giovanni, Ash's father figure, to achieve this. Jesse will trick the submissive James into her bidding. Meowth especially wants to appease him because he remembers the good times with Giovanni. This places Meowth in the category known as Ash's corrupted innocence. This is apparent because Meowth is able to speak. In fact, the whole reason Meowth can speak is so Ash can eventually accept the aspects of Team Rocket as parts of himself. Ash had issues with his father, so he put him atop the evil corporation and demoralized him. There may be an actual Team Rocket in the real world, but it's doubtful that Ash's father is their leader. Ash likely feels the spirit between his parents was partially his fault, and also partially blames his father. The split caused his mother to move out of the city down to Pallet Town, and is one reason why Ash initially embarks on his journey to escape the turmoil at home. The whole organization, including Bush and Cassidy, is symbolic of his inability to escape his father mechanisms. James is implied homosexually, which is not necessarily make Ash homosexual, and gullibility, while Jesse is vanity and manipulation. Since Meowth has the potential of rehabilitation and doesn't want to be evil, this once again fits conflicting personalities and demoralized self-theory. Team Rocket cross-dresses because Ash is exploring his gender, a different facet than what Brock represents, sexuality. This is a method that allowed his gay, vain side to experiment freely. When he found out that it wasn't something for him, he, free side, stopped playing with it. Max came with May. He played the ego, and she played the id, with great aspirations in that session. They worked for a little while, but with Ash being a teenager, his sexuality had come back into play. He kept renovating himself and eventually wrote new aspects, but his mind slowly brought the old ones back as a crutch to make the transition easier. Dawn is Ash giving himself a chance to love. Since he already established Misty as someone he's not likely to go anywhere with, he created a new super female, one that was more like him and less violent. You may note that while both May and Misty have no tolerance for Brock's behavior, Dawn seems to try to shrug it off. Tracy, the breeder, was a possible future for Ash that he discarded. The future was one that he sent off to work with the professor, Ash's ultimate ideal of a father figure, when Tracy disrupted the dynamic Ash had with his other possibilities. With Ash's mind fighting the coma and Ash viewing this person as a comparison, Tracy was quickly replaced with a more threatening rival. Pikachu represents Ash's humanity. This explains the episodes where they get separated and Ash desperately wants to find him, even to the point of working with Team Rocket, aspects of himself he would never normally associate himself with, but for some reason cannot. Team Rocket wants to steal Pikachu and hand him over to Giovanni. Jesse and James will always oppose Ash because he is terrified of the thought of his humanity lying in the hands of his father. However, this is the same reason he will work with the aspects of himself in order to save his humanity. Ash can evolve Pikachu because that would mean challenging his concept of who he was, which was something he wasn't comfortable with while working through his original issues. The narrator in Ash's mind, recapping and explaining the progress he's made and the tribulations he will face, allowing insight into how to best awaken him. Team Rocket's methods gradually become more and more ludicrous because Ash is only a child dreaming these things up. That is why Team Rocket's disguises are always believed. He knows it's them, at least on a subconscious level, but chooses to ignore it so he can better himself. In a sense, the Ash who wants to escape its sabotaging, the Ash who wants to stay lost in his mind so that there can be no conflict and hopefully an eventual escape. The escape is a consequence of coming to terms with who he is. As mentioned previously, Team Rocket are a method to Ash to deal with the grounds he's uncomfortable with, lacking his own. You may recall that early in the show, there were animals as references to animals. For example, the fish in the aquarium of the Cerulean City Gym, or in the Pokédex lists Pikachu as rat-like. These animals don't matter to Ash's psyche. They don't come to play much. If Ash loved puppies, everything would be about different breeds of dogs and a dog fighting circuit. But as the series goes on, you see fewer realistic animals and more Pokemon. This could be a sign of Ash's mind deteriorating. As he's in the coma, he's losing concepts of some animals and machinery and replacing them with Pokemon. It could explain things like electric Pokemon working as power generators. These are signs that his memory of an old world is slipping more and more as time goes by. The Pokemon realm is idolized continuously the longer he has no stimulus from the real world. Ash may or may not be mentally deteriorating, but he is becoming more accustomed to his fake world's rules. The wild Pokemon are his rationalizations for functioning of his creative fantasy. It's the "a wizard did it" syndrome. If he doesn't know how it works, his mind says Pokemon. The Pokemon in Ash's team, however, serve the purpose of displaying his issues and aspects of himself. For example, Charmander represents his sex drive, not his sexuality like Brock. At first it's cute, easy thing to control, but eventually becomes a raging inferno of disobedience since Ash has no real understanding of his sexuality, thus no way to vent or keep it in check. Bulbasaur was unwillingness to change, reflected of it in when it declines to evolve and almost decided to stay behind unless he battled it. Squirtle was his willingness to follow the lead of others, as evidenced by the gang it ran with. Even though he ran the gang, they were viewed as one group, and Ash's subconscious gave him the strongest one. Butterfree was his crushing loneliness, which dealt with when he released it to join a flock. His bird types are his recklessness, always willing to sacrifice something at a moment's notice for the win. When Ash is training Pokemon, it's an attempt to push his own problems away on someone else. However, he realizes this usually trades back very quickly.